My father-in-law's name appeared on my phone at 7:14 in the morning, Paris time. I was sitting on the terrace of my hotel in the 7th arrondissement, a café crème in one hand. The Eiffel Tower visible through the morning mist exactly the way you only ever see it in photographs, and I almost let the call go to voicemail. Almost. I answered because I am, at my core, the kind of man who still answers. That, as it turns out, was the last time I would make that mistake. "What do you think you're doing?" His voice came through the speaker like a freight train with no brakes. Loud, certain, the kind of voice that's been listened to for so long it forgot how to ask. "You think you can just disappear whenever you feel like it? You think the company runs itself while you're off playing tourist somewhere? Who approved this trip, Marcus? Who?" "I want you to notice something." He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't ask how Paris was. He didn't ask about Vanessa, his own daughter, who was sitting 3 feet away from me in a white linen robe, pouring orange juice, pretending she couldn't hear every word. His name is Gerald Whitmore. He's 64 years old. He founded Whitmore Systems Integration in Bellevue, Washington, 23 years ago, and he has spent the last 6 of those years making absolutely sure I understood that I worked for him, not with him. "I approve the trip, Gerald," I said. My voice was very calm, very flat, the way still water is flat right before something enormous moves underneath it. "I submitted the PTO request 8 weeks ago. It was approved by HR, countersigned by the VP of Operations, and forwarded to your office. I don't care who signed what. You're the lead architect on the Brennan rollout. You left in the middle of a critical phase. The Brennan rollout doesn't go live for 11 weeks. That's not the point. Then what is the point, Gerald?" And here's where it got very, very quiet on his end. Because men like Gerald Whitmore always have a reason, and the reason is almost never the one they lead with. The real reason usually comes out in the silence. And sure enough, after about 4 seconds, it arrived. "I've been talking to the board," he said. "I've been reconsidering some things. I think we need to restructure your role." I looked out at Paris. I looked at Vanessa, who had set down her juice and was now staring very carefully at a croissant. I thought about the last 6 years, about the 70-hour weeks, about the 3 separate enterprise-level systems I had designed from the ground up, systems that now generated, conservatively, 40% of Whitmore Systems' annual revenue, about the raise that never came, about the promotion that kept getting postponed, about every conversation in which Gerald had made it clear, without ever quite saying it directly, that I worked in his house and should be grateful for the roof. "Restructure my role," I repeated. "We're going to move you to a supporting position, something more advisory. We're bringing in someone to take the lead on architecture going forward, someone who understands the priorities of this company." I picked up my café crème. "Gerald," I said, "I want to make sure I understand you correctly. You're telling me that while I'm on an approved vacation, my first real time off in 6 years, you are calling me to tell me that you're demoting me. I'm not framing it as a demotion. Are you firing me?" Another pause. "I'm restructuring the team." "Gerald, are you firing me? If you want to call it that." And then he said something. He said, and I need you to hear this exactly the way he said it, "We don't need a lazy pig who thinks he can just disappear whenever he wants." I want you to hold that word in your mind for a second. Lazy. A man who had not taken a single vacation day in 6 years. A man who had responded to work calls during his own wedding reception, something Vanessa has never fully forgiven, and which I only understand now because I'm telling this story from the other side of everything that followed. A man who had, the previous February, worked 36 straight hours to keep a server migration from collapsing on a deadline, then driven home in the rain and slept on the bathroom floor because he didn't want to wake his wife getting into bed. Lazy. I looked to my left. At the table next to mine, a man had been sitting for most of the morning reading a newspaper and occasionally glancing out at the city the way people do when they're on vacation and have nowhere to be and nothing to prove. He was maybe 55, silver at the temples, well-dressed without trying to announce it. We had spoken briefly the evening before at the hotel bar. Just pleasantries. His name, he'd mentioned, was Neil Hargrove. I know that name meant nothing to me when he said it on Tuesday evening. By Wednesday morning, Sitting on that terrace with Gerald Whitmore's voice in my ear and the Eiffel Tower in my eye line, that name had rearranged itself into something very, very different. Neil Hargrove was the CEO of Cascade Digital Solutions. He had been the CEO of Cascade Digital Solutions for 9 years. Cascade Digital Solutions was the one competitor Gerald Whitmore talked about more than any other, the one he called reckless at quarterly meetings, the one he called a flash in the pan, the one he had lost 3 major contracts to in the past 18 months. "Gerald," I said, cutting him off mid-sentence. "I'm going to go enjoy my breakfast now." "Excuse me?" "Goodbye." I hung up, set the phone down, picked up my coffee, looked over at Neil Hargrove, who was folding his newspaper and preparing to stand. I raised my cup. He raised his. We toasted, 2 strangers on a terrace in Paris, to absolutely nothing in particular. But that was about to change. Before I tell you what happened next, I need to tell you who I am and how I ended up at a hotel in Paris with a recently severed career and a very interesting breakfast companion. My name is Marcus. I'm 38 years old. I am, or was, a senior systems architect at Whitmore Systems Integration in Seattle, Washington. Before that, I spent 4 years at a tech consultancy in Austin, building enterprise infrastructure for mid-market clients. And before that, I put myself through a master's program in computer science at the University of Washington, while working nights at a data center in Redmond. I am not a man who was given things. I am a man who built things. And there is a particular kind of relationship that forms between a man who builds things and the people who claim ownership of what he built. It almost always ends exactly the way this one did. Vanessa is my wife of 4 years. She is beautiful, bright, and operates a boutique interior design firm out of Capitol Hill that she built herself, which is the thing I respected most about her from the beginning. She came up the same way I did, not handed anything. We met at a housewarming party for a mutual friend, argued for 40 minutes about whether open floor plans were architecturally honest or aesthetically cowardly, and were engaged 14 months later. Her father, Gerald, was gracious at the wedding. He made a toast. He talked about welcoming me into the family. He shook my hand like he meant it. What I did not understand then was that welcoming me into the family and welcoming me into his company were not the same gesture. That one was genuine and one was a contract, and contracts have terms that aren't always written on the surface. Gerald had been after me to join Whitmore Systems for almost 2 years before I finally said yes. Vanessa encouraged it. The offer was good. The work was genuinely interesting. And there is something appealing, or there was something appealing, about building something for your family, about contributing to something that would eventually belong, at least in part, to your wife. I understand now how that reasoning can be used against you. The first sign came at month 4. I had just finished a complete redesign of the company's legacy authentication infrastructure, something that had been causing security vulnerabilities for 3 years and costing them clients. I presented the solution to the executive team. Gerald stood up when I finished and said, and I remember this word for word, "See, this is why we brought Marcus on. Good team effort." Team effort. I was the only person who had touched that project. I filed that away. That's what careful men do. They file things. Month 9. A competing offer arrived from a firm in San Francisco. 40% more money. Equity stake. No family dynamics. I showed it to Gerald because he had asked me to always bring outside offers to him first, something he framed as trust, but which I later understood was surveillance. He matched the base salary and asked me to stay. He did not offer equity. He offered instead a handshake and the phrase, "Your family, Marcus. You don't need a contract with family." I stayed. Month 14. A client, a regional hospital system in Spokane, came back specifically requesting me for a second project. Gerald told me the client had requested his team. He took the meeting himself and brought along 2 engineers who had never spoken to the client. I found out about this from the hospital's IT director, who called me directly to ask why I hadn't been at the kickoff meeting. Month 22. The Brennan rollout. This was the big one. A statewide government services platform that Whitmore Systems had been trying to land for 4 years. I wrote the technical proposal. I designed the architecture. I sat in every single meeting. When the contract was signed, Gerald sent a company-wide email about the achievement. My name was not in it. Month 26. I submitted my first PTO request in 6 years. 8 days. Paris. An anniversary trip Vanessa and I had been planning since before I joined the company. Something she had earned after 2 years of watching me choose work over every other available option. The request was approved on a Tuesday. Gerald called me on a Thursday morning to ask if I'd thought about what it would look like if I was unavailable during this phase of the Brennan project. I went anyway, because sometimes a man has to decide what kind of man he is. And that brings us back to Paris. To a terrace in the 7th arrondissement. To a café crème going warm in my hand, a phone on the table, and Neil Hargrove folding his newspaper and looking at me with the mild curiosity of a man who has recognized something in another man's expression. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe. This is the kind of story that's going to stay with you, and I need you on the ride with me because we are nowhere close to done. Whatever you think is coming, you're only half right. That was an interesting call, Neil said. He said it the way men say things when they're not entirely sure they should say them, but they've made a calculated decision to say them anyway. It was, I said. He sat back down, poured more coffee, studied me for a moment with the kind of focused attention I recognize from boardrooms and technical briefings, the attention of a man who processes information quickly and has learned not to waste the good of it. You want to tell me what just happened? I thought about it for a moment. There was no good reason to tell him anything. He was a stranger in a foreign city at a breakfast table that happened to share 4 feet of air with mine. But there was also no good reason not to. The call was over. The decision, whatever it was, had been made for me. And there is something about Paris in the morning that makes discretion feel like a smaller virtue than it usually does. I told him. Briefly, clearly, the same way I would walk someone through a system architecture. Here are the inputs. Here is what was built. Here is where the failure occurred. Here is what just happened on this terrace. Neil listened without interrupting. He did not make sympathetic noises. He did not perform concern. He just listened with both hands around his coffee cup and his eyes steady. When I finished, he was quiet for about 10 seconds. Then he said, "How well do you know the Brennan platform?" "I designed it," I said. "Every layer?" "Every layer." "And what's your position on non-competes? Are you under one?" I had read my employment contract with the kind of care that comes from knowing exactly who you're working for. I have a 6-month non-compete for direct competitors in the Pacific Northwest. Cascade Digital is headquartered in Portland, which is in the Pacific Northwest. Neil nodded slowly. "It is." "But," I said, "non-competes for enterprise tech architects are generally unenforceable in Washington state for roles where the compensation falls below a certain threshold." He looked at me. I looked at him. "Does it?" he asked. Gerald has been very careful about how he structured my compensation. Base salary, not equity, not bonuses that would push the total above the statutory threshold. Neil set down his cup. He was doing math. I could see it happening. "What's your availability after Paris?" he said. "I was just told I no longer have a job. So, immediately." "You could say that." He pulled out a business card and set it on the table between us. "I have meetings in London Thursday and Friday. I'll be back in Portland by Monday. Call me Thursday, and we can talk about what a consulting arrangement might look like while the non-compete situation gets clarified." I looked at the card. I looked at Paris. I thought about Gerald Whitmore's voice saying the word lazy to a man who had worked himself into the floor for 6 consecutive years. "I'll call you Thursday," I said. Vanessa had heard more of the call than she let on. By the time I came back inside, she was sitting on the edge of the bed still in her robe, and she had the look she gets when she is organizing her thoughts before she speaks. It's a particular stillness. She gets it from her mother, not from Gerald. "He fired you," she said. It wasn't a question. He restructured my role. His words. "Marcus." "Yes," I said. "He fired me." She was quiet for a moment. "Did you hang up on him?" "Yes." Something moved across her face that I chose to interpret as relief, though I could be wrong. With Vanessa, the complicated feelings always surface slowly, like objects rising from the bottom of deep water. "What are you going to do?" she asked. I told her about Neil Hargrove. I told her about Thursday's call. I did not minimize what any of it meant, and I did not perform certainty I didn't fully have yet. One of the things I have always believed about Vanessa is that she deserves accurate information. She grew up in a house where information was selectively distributed for strategic purposes. I was not going to do that to her. She listened to everything. She nodded once when I finished. "Okay," she said. "Okay? Okay, do it. Figure it out. We're in Paris for 4 more days. Let's be in Paris." She stood up and walked to the closet and started pulling out clothes for the day. "And Marcus, for the record, I want you to know that I know what you gave up staying there. I know how many times you chose that place over things that mattered. I want you to know I saw it." I didn't say anything, because there wasn't anything to say to that except thank you, and thank you felt insufficient. We spent the next 4 days doing exactly what people are supposed to do in Paris. We walked the length of the Seine. We ate at a restaurant in Montmartre where the tables were so close together, the couple next to us apologized for speaking French too enthusiastically. We went to the Musée d'Orsay, and I stood in front of a Monet for 6 full minutes, something I have never done in front of anything in my life, and understood for the first time why people come back to Paris over and over again when they could be going anywhere else. On Thursday, I stepped outside the hotel at exactly 9 in the morning Seattle time and called Neil Hargrove. The call lasted 47 minutes. When I went back up to the room, Vanessa looked at my face and said, "Good call?" "Very good call," I said. We flew home Sunday. I had not responded to a single message from Gerald's office, of which there were, by my count, 11. 7 emails, 3 texts, 1 voicemail from his assistant, a woman named Patrice, who sounded apologetic in the way people sound apologetic when they've been told to reach out by someone who doesn't apologize. I recognized Patrice's voice from 6 years of phone calls she'd made on Gerald's behalf, and I knew her well enough to know that the apology in her tone was not manufactured. She genuinely felt bad about what she was being asked to do. That told me something about Gerald, too, that the people closest to him had developed a specific skill set around cushioning the impact of his decisions. The remaining 4 days in Paris were the best 4 days I had in recent memory. I want to say that because I don't want this story to be only about the professional part. There was a night, our 3rd night, when Vanessa and I got intentionally lost in the Marais for about 2 hours after dinner, taking turns at every intersection to pick the street that looked less likely. And we ended up in a tiny square with a fountain and a single bar, where the owner was playing guitar badly and happily, and a group of people were sitting outside on mismatched chairs in the way French people sit outside, like sitting outside is an accomplishment rather than an activity. We stayed for an hour and a half. I did not check my phone once. I had not done that, not checked my phone for 90 minutes of an evening, in as long as I could specifically remember. I made a private commitment to myself on the walk back to the hotel. That version of myself, the one who couldn't sit still for 90 minutes without the pull of a device, that was not a version I was interested in maintaining. Whatever came next professionally, the man doing it was going to be someone who could sit in a square in the Marais with bad guitar and good wine and nowhere urgent to be and call it enough. Because it was enough. It was more than enough. I had not told Vanessa the full content of my Thursday call yet. I wanted to wait until we were home, in our apartment in Fremont, in our kitchen, with coffee, the way we make decisions that matter. That conversation happened Monday morning. Here is what I had agreed to with Neil Hargrove. A senior consulting engagement with Cascade Digital Solutions. Not a permanent role, not yet. A 6-month contract to lead architecture consulting on 3 of their major enterprise projects. The compensation was structured in a way that specifically avoided any conflict with the existing non-compete, something Neil's legal team had reviewed before our Thursday call, because Neil Hargrove had done his research before he sat down on that Paris terrace. He had looked me up after we spoke at the hotel bar Tuesday evening. He knew exactly who I was before he asked me a single question. The number on the consulting contract was more than I had made in my last 2 years combined at Whitmore Systems. Vanessa set down her coffee cup when I told her the number. "Combined?" she said. "Combined." She was quiet for a moment. "He really did not pay you what you were worth," No, I said, he did not. And Neil Hargrove figured that out in a hotel bar in Paris. Neil Hargrove is a very good businessman. Apparently so is his wife, but that's a different point. She picked her coffee back up. What about the non-compete? What about Gerald? And here is the part I had been thinking about since that phone call on the terrace. The part that required a particular kind of careful. The non-compete is almost certainly unenforceable, I said. But that doesn't mean Gerald won't try. And if he tries, it gets expensive and it gets loud and it creates a story that he controls the narrative of. I looked at her. But here's the thing. I didn't just spend 6 years building systems for your father's company. I documented everything. Every decision, every architecture choice, every technical specification. I have personal backups of every project brief I authored. All of it is time-stamped. All of it has my name on it. What does that mean? It means, I said, that if Gerald Whitmore wants to spend legal fees trying to enforce an unenforceable contract against a man who can prove, with documents, that he originated the core intellectual products of his company's most profitable years, that is absolutely Gerald's choice. But it will not be a quiet one. Vanessa looked at me for a long moment. You've been planning this since Paris. I've been planning this since month 4, I said. Paris is just when the timeline accelerated. I started the Cascade engagement on a Wednesday. I did not announce anything publicly. I did not post anything to LinkedIn. I did not call former colleagues to deliver the kind of breathless update that signals more drama than direction. Men who have actually thought through their next move don't need to tell people about it before it happens. They show up. They work. They let the results be the announcement. I showed up to a conference room in a glass-walled building in Portland, Oregon, on the 12th floor of a building overlooking the Pearl District, and I met 12 engineers who looked at me with the kind of cautious assessment that means they've been told something impressive and are not yet sure whether to believe it. Engineers are, as a rule, the most honest audience you will ever present to. They do not applaud out of politeness. They do not nod along to keep the meeting moving. They wait and they watch, and they ask precise questions. And if your answers are precise back, something shifts in the room that feels like weather changing, like the pressure dropping just before the sky opens up. I spent the first 3 hours of that Wednesday walking their team through a whiteboard session on the architecture of the first project I had been brought in to consult on. I did not use a single slide. I drew it from memory, in sequence, explaining each dependency and each decision point and each potential failure mode with the same care I would take explaining something to myself. By lunch, 3 of those engineers had pulled out notebooks. The work was extraordinary. I don't say that to impress you. I say it because after 6 years of building things that were called someone else's, there is a specific feeling that comes with building in a room where people know your name on the whiteboard is your name, where the decisions you make get recorded accurately, where at the end of the week someone sends you an email that says, "This is exactly what we needed," and they mean you, specifically, not the team, not the department, not the effort in general, you, by name, with specifics. That feeling is what men like Gerald Whitmore take from builders when they strip attribution. They don't just take the credit, they take the evidence that the builder exists. And after 6 years of having that taken, getting it back felt like breathing after being underwater for a very long time. I worked harder in those first 3 weeks at Cascade than I had in my last year at Whitmore. Not because of the compensation, though the compensation was real and it mattered, but because the work had weight again. When everything you build belongs to you, or at least is honestly acknowledged as yours, the effort has a different quality to it. There is no part of you holding back, conserving, wondering whether the next thing you give will also be absorbed without acknowledgement. You give everything because giving everything goes somewhere it belongs. Gerald's office made contact on day 11, not Gerald himself. Gerald never does the uncomfortable things himself. It was his legal team, a firm in Bellevue, a letter asserting that my engagement with Cascade Digital constituted a breach of the non-compete agreement in my employment contract with Whitmore Systems Integration. I forwarded the letter to my attorney, a woman named Sandra Okafor, who I had quietly hired 2 weeks before the Paris trip, because again, I am a man who does not make plans in heat. When I had first sat down with Sandra in her office in downtown Seattle, I had spread out 3 years of personal records across her conference table. Project briefs with my name on the drafts and Gerald's name on the final versions. Technical specifications dated and signed in my hand, then reproduced in company documents without attribution. Email chains showing my authorship of proposals that were later submitted under the company banner with no individual credit attached. Sandra had looked at all of it in complete silence for about 12 minutes. She is not a woman who performs reaction. She reads, she thinks, she speaks. When she finally spoke, she said, "If this man ever tries to enforce a non-compete against you, he is going to regret that he paid for the legal team to draft it." That was the moment I understood that I was not just prepared. I was positioned. Sandra's response to Whitmore's legal team was 11 pages long, detailed, and included documentation of the Washington state statute, case law from 3 directly analogous situations, and a timeline of my contributions to Whitmore Systems that she described to me, and I am quoting here, as the most comprehensively documented employment record I have reviewed in 14 years of practice. The response walked through, project by project, the measurable revenue impact of my architectural decisions. It cited specific contracts won as a direct result of technical proposals I had authored. It included, in an appendix, a calculation of what equity compensation would look like if my contributions had been weighted against the value I had generated. The number in that appendix was not small. She also included, on page 9, a polite but unambiguous note that if Whitmore Systems chose to pursue litigation, we would be filing a counterclaim for unpaid equity compensation based on the value generated by my documented intellectual contributions, and that we anticipated the discovery process would be both thorough and educational for all parties involved. We did not hear back from the Bellevue law firm after that. What we did hear, about 3 weeks later, was from Patrice. Not as Gerald's assistant this time. On her own phone on a Saturday morning, to ask if I would be willing to speak with Gerald. I thought about it for exactly the amount of time it deserved, which was about 4 seconds. "Tell him I'm available Tuesday between 2 and 3, I said. "He can call me." Patrice's voice changed slightly when I said that. Something small but real. "I'll let him know," she said. And I thought, not for the first time, that Patrice had probably been filing things away for a very long time as well. Gerald called at 2:15 on Tuesday. He was 4 years older, sounding it, and missing something in his voice that I had been hearing for 6 years. The volume was still there. The certainty was still there. But the solidity underneath it was gone, and I noticed its absence the way you notice when a load-bearing wall has been removed from a building. Everything is still standing, technically, but the whole structure has shifted. He opened with a compliment. That was new. "I hear you're doing well over at Cascade," he said. "Good for you." I let that land without a response. "Listen, Marcus, I want to be direct with you. Please. The call in Paris. The way that went. I may have been too harsh." There it was, not an apology. Gerald Whitmore does not apologize. He acknowledges that things perhaps went too far, that certain language perhaps exceeded what the situation required. He may have been too harsh. It is the passive construction of a man who has been made to feel the consequences of something without being willing to claim responsibility for the cause. "I appreciate you saying that," I said. "The board has been asking about the Brennan rollout. Your replacement on that project has run into some issues. Significant issues. I did not say anything to that either. I just let the silence be. We were wondering if you'd be open to some kind of consulting arrangement, helping get things back on track. Obviously, we'd compensate you fairly. And here is the moment I want you to stay with, because this is the one that matters." I thought about every conversation I'd had with Gerald in 6 years. I thought about month 4 and good team effort. I thought about the outside offer and the handshake and "you don't need a contract with family." I thought about a hospital IT director calling me to ask why I hadn't been at my own meeting. I thought about a company-wide email about a contract I had won in which my name did not appear. I thought about a phone call on a Paris terrace at 7:14 in the morning. I thought about the word lazy applied to a man who had not taken a single vacation day in 6 years. And then I thought about Neil Hargrove, who had listened to my story over Café Crème and asked one question: "How well do you know the Brennan platform?" There is a difference between the two men. Gerald saw what I had built and spent 6 years finding ways to claim ownership of it. Neil saw what I had built in 47 minutes and spent the rest of the morning figuring out what it was worth and whether I'd be willing to be compensated for it. One man sees builders as labor. The other sees them as assets. I had spent 6 years working for the first kind of man. I had been in Portland for 3 weeks working for the second. I already knew which world I was staying in. "Gerald," I said, "I appreciate the call, and I appreciate the acknowledgement about Paris. I mean that genuinely. But I'm under a contractual commitment that I intend to honor, and my capacity is fully spoken for through the next several months at minimum." Silence. "I see," he said. "I think you probably do," I said. "And Gerald, for what it's worth, the Brennan architecture is documented in full. Every decision is in the specification files which I authored. Your team should be able to work from them if they're reading carefully." He did not thank me for that. "Good luck with the rollout," I said. "Tell Patrice I hope she's doing well." I hung up. I sat for a moment at my desk in the Portland office, looking out the window at the Willamette River catching the afternoon light. Then I opened the proposal deck I had been working on all morning, a new enterprise architecture for a healthcare system out of Boise, and I got back to the part that needed finishing. The Brennan rollout missed its deadline by 9 weeks. That became public record when the state agency issued a contract extension notice, a document that anyone paying attention could access. The replacement architect, I heard through a former colleague who now had no reason not to speak freely, had attempted to rebuild portions of my original design without fully understanding the dependency architecture, which created a cascading failure in the testing environment that took 6 weeks to diagnose. I didn't feel triumphant about that. I want to be clear about that. The people who suffered from the delay were state employees waiting on a better system, and they hadn't done anything wrong. I felt something more complicated, the particular sadness that comes from watching something break that didn't have to break, that only broke because someone with power made a decision that was about pride and control rather than competence. Gerald, I heard through Vanessa, had a difficult Q3. 2 of the enterprise clients they had been in late-stage negotiations with went to Cascade instead. Whether that was directly connected to me or simply the market being what the market is, I genuinely cannot say. I did not engineer it. I showed up to work in Portland and did my job. If the job was good enough to win clients, that was the work speaking, not me pulling strings. What I can tell you is that by month 5 of the consulting contract, Neil Hargrove's team offered to convert the arrangement to a permanent senior role, head of enterprise architecture, reporting directly to the CTO. The compensation package included equity. Equity. I signed on a Thursday afternoon. Vanessa brought wine. The good kind, a Willamette Valley Pinot she had been saving for something that felt right. "We should go back to Paris," she said. "We should." "Maybe June." "Maybe June," I agreed. She poured. We sat at our kitchen table in Fremont and were very quiet for a while, the kind of quiet that 2 people who have been through something together get to have on the other side of it. "Do you regret any of it?" she asked. 6 years of it. I thought about that honestly. I regret some of the specific moments, the wedding reception call, the times I could see you waiting for something I wasn't giving. I regret those things specifically and genuinely. But not the work. The work was real, I said. Whatever was done with it. The things I built were real and they worked and they'll keep working regardless of whose name is on them. That part I don't regret. She nodded slowly. My father is going to need to find a new architect eventually. Probably. He won't hire someone as good as you. He won't pay for someone as good as me, I said. He could hire someone just as good. He just would have to pay them what they're actually worth, and he's never been willing to do that. Vanessa looked at her wine for a moment. That's the thing, isn't it? He thinks paying what something is worth is losing. Some people do. He raised me, she said. I want you to know I know that matters. I know it shaped how I think. I've been thinking about it. I know, I said. I think the difference between us and him isn't that we work harder or we're smarter. I think it's that we believe what we build belongs to the person who built it. He doesn't believe that. I looked at my wife. 4 years married. Still capable of surprising me with the precision of a single sentence. That's exactly it, I said. I want to tell you one more thing. Not about Gerald, not about the job, not about the money. about Neil Hargrove and the terrace in Paris. I ran into him 3 months into the new role at a tech industry event in Seattle. We were in the same room by coincidence, though at that point coincidence had started to feel like a less precise concept than it used to. He saw me across the room and came over and shook my hand the way men shake hands when they know what the handshake is really about. "How's the Boise healthcare system coming?" he asked. He had been following the project. "On track," I said. "Ahead of schedule, actually." He nodded like that was what he expected. "Thank you," I said. "For Paris. I want you to know I know what that conversation was." He tilted his head slightly like the gratitude was something he hadn't planned for. "I watched a man get fired on vacation over his first cup of coffee," he said, and instead of getting upset, he put his phone down and thought carefully. That told me everything I needed to know. He paused. "Besides, you did me the favor. The question was whether you'd realize it in time to let me return it." We talked for a few more minutes about the industry, about a regulatory trend he was tracking, about nothing and everything the way people talk when they've already established the important things. And then the event moved on, and we moved with it, and I thought about what he had said, about who picks up the phone and who puts it down, about the 6 years of answering that I had done, and the one moment of hanging up that had changed everything. There's a version of this story where I answer Gerald's call that morning and apologize and fly home early and spend another 2 years waiting for something to get better on its own. I know that version. I watched other people live it for 6 years. I chose the terrace instead. I chose the Café Crème. I chose the Eiffel Tower through the morning mist and a stranger's business card set down on a table between us. I chose Paris. Sometimes choosing where you stand is the only thing left to do. And sometimes that choice is everything.